Hi, and thanks for tuning in. Have you ever wanted to tell a professional or family member, hey wait, my child isn't even wrong? This comes up a lot because our children perceive the world in a different way, and oftentimes others just see it as wrong when it's just different. I have a number of stories I want to share today that illustrate this point, because I also want to heighten our sensitivity to the fact that our children are sometimes called out as wrong when it is just a different way of perceiving it. Plus, these stories are just so stinking cute. The first one I want to share is about a time when he was having a speech evaluation. He had them every year where he had to, share what vocabulary he knew and a bunch of other things to evaluate what level he was at. At the time, he was about 9, and he had a lot of words, but he wasn't putting together sentences yet. And she was testing his vocabulary, she, the speech teacher, and she showed him a number of pictures, and he had to say what it was. And he was getting a lot of them right, but he had gotten 2 of them wrong already. And the rule was, once you got the 3rd one wrong, that was it. That dictated the level you were at. So she shows him a picture, and it's a picture of a house, and there are water puddles all around. And he says to her, "House stuck in the water." She was like, no, it's flood. The word she was looking for was flood. And I looked at that picture and I thought, wait, that looks like a house stuck in the water. It's exactly what it is. In addition to the fact that that was the most words I think we'd ever heard him put together in a sentence. So that was a great example of, he wasn't really wrong. I get it that the test, you have to follow the rules of testing, and you have to end the test when they get 3 wrong, and it technically was wrong. But was it? Another example, this one wasn't from my son, but I was observing at a school, and a little boy, they were doing some artwork, and he drew a duck and colored it in red. And he took it to the teacher, and the teacher said, "No, that's wrong. Ducks aren't red." And I thought to myself, this is art. Can't ducks be whatever color they want to be? How many times do we have to tell our children they're wrong? So that was also another one that was kind of heartbreaking, because it was an opportunity to understand how this boy saw the world, as opposed to having to tell him he was wrong about something. In addition, as I watched that scenario, I thought to myself, had my neurotypical daughter drawn a red duck, she would have explained on and on to the teacher exactly why the duck was red, why it should be red, why it had red friends, whatever she would have explained. But this young boy didn't have all that language. I'm sure he had something in his head, some reason why he wanted it to be red, and he couldn't share that. So that's another reason for us to be really sensitive to trying to just understand what they're thinking, going along with it, not calling them out as being wrong. The next story is one where I didn't really see it his way until he showed me. We were in our last year of homeschooling, and I wanted to teach him how to do worksheets. We had done a very play-based program, but I knew that I wanted him to start school the following year, and he had never done anything that was like seat work or working on a worksheet and putting his name on it, things like that. So I started with something, even though he was like 11, we started something so simple, because what I was working on was the process of doing worksheets, not the content, right? I wanted to make the content easy so that we could focus on the process. So I give him a worksheet, and the first question says on the top, put a color in the circle next to each item that is a square. And they had a bunch of different shapes on the page, and a little dot next to each one where you could color in the dot if something was a square. And he looks at, there were like 10 pictures, and he looks at all of these items and he colors in 1 dot. And I said, okay, well, that was a good try. Let's go over it. Let's see, what the answers are. So the first one's like an ice cream cone. And I was like, okay, great. I see that. That's not a square. The second one was a square, and he colored in that dot. Great job. The next one was, I don't know, some other, like a ball. Okay, great. That's not a square either. The next one was a napkin, and he didn't color in the dot. So I said, well, let's talk about this one. Let's think about it. I said to him, take a look. What shape is this? Is it a square? And he said, no. I said, well, if it's not a square, what is it? And he said, it's a napkin. And the truth was that the right question for him in his very literal mind was, is this in the shape of a square? because it was a napkin. It had a name. The name, like back to the whole vocabulary issue, the name it had was napkin, not square. So we were asking the wrong question. And that was an aha moment for me that, I had to ask him questions in the way he perceived the world. Once I went back and asked him to color in the dot next to each item that was in the shape of a square, he could do it easily because it was the right question for his brain. The last story is one that is also just adorable and is just such a good example of literal brains, right? We were having brunch at my house. I'd had my parents for the weekend. They lived out of town and they had been staying with us, and we were eating at the table. And at that time, he had a really hard time. He must have been like maybe 6, sitting at the table. He might have sat for a few minutes, then he was running around, and that was fine with us. And as he was running around, he looks over, he sees something on my mother's plate that he wants to eat. And all weekend I had been explaining to her that he still had very few words. So while she was a stickler for words like please and thank you and things like that, we weren't spending our time on those words yet because we had more important functional words that we wanted him to learn, like eat or hungry or help. Because please and thank you weren't functional. I didn't want to use the few words he had on something that weren't functional. That were just aimed to please society. So he's running around, as I said, he sees something on her plate, he goes to grab for it, and she grabs his hand. Because, she's thinking it's rude, you can't just grab things off of people's plates. So she stops and she looks at him, she goes, Matthew, what's the magic word? And he looks at her and he goes, abracadabra. I couldn't believe it. First of all, he only had a few words, so like his 6th word was abracadabra. But also, since when is please a magic word, right? It's such a better answer to say that abracadabra is the magic word. I wanted to share these stories to just heighten our awareness of the ways in which our children perceive the world in such a different way that sometimes their answers or their comments, they come off as not what we expected, but they're not wrong. I hope this was fun for you. I hope you enjoyed the stories. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments if you have any stories that are similar to where your child interpreted something so literally and even was called out as wrong. I'd love to hear your stories. I'll see you in the next one.